Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? Herman Cain's answer. 2 simple words. I forgot.
As they got to the microphone, my first response in my mind and reaction was, I don't even know who this woman is.
How many times do we let ourselves get into terrible situations because we don't say, I forgot?
How can I defend charges when I don't remember this person by name? I don't remember that she did work at the Educational Foundation. And when I first saw her, I didn't even recognize her.
Now there's a Cain news conference, and one of the original accusers has been named by Rupert Murdoch. Occupy on the march to protest the Bush tax cuts, marching from New York to Washington. Today, soundtrack. David Crosby and Graham Nash speak and perform.
I want you to sing this with me.
Our special guests, David Crosby and Graham Nash. Zygote hood, sperm hood, personhood. It's not just for Mississippi anymore. As that state votes, the move to define life as the moment the sperm hits the egg goes national.
You're exactly the same person that you were then. The only thing that's been added to you is time and food.
Speak for yourself, Goober. Issue 2, Ohio voting today to back collective bargaining and beat the Koch brothers. Worsts. She wants to expand Mount Rushmore. 3 new presidents, including Garfield. And an exit strategy for this man in weeks or days. Why? Fire him. Fire him now. All that and more now on Countdown. Good evening from New York. This is Tuesday, November 8th, 364 days until the 2012 presidential election. May not be very big at all, but Occupy will have its first march on Washington tomorrow to protest extending the Bush tax cuts. And in our 5th story in the countdown, Occupy Wall Street using a spring-like day to get its winter generators back and adding winter tents and world-class protest music from 2 long-term campaigners for human rights. David Crosby and Graham Nash will join us here on Countdown in a moment.
Speak out!
You got to speak your mind if you still dare.
I want you to sing this with me.
No more war.
Come on, like that.
No more war. Sing loud.
Meanwhile, Occupy the Highway, scheduled to leave Zuccotti Park for the nation's capital at noon tomorrow. Organizers say a dozen Zuccotti activists will head south and plans to make 20 miles per day on a 240-mile route with 2 days off for rest. That core group also hopes to pick up local marchers as it travels through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, and scheduling themselves to arrive in Washington on November 23rd, when a congressional committee is supposed to decide whether to sustain President Obama's extension of the Bush tax cuts. Something Occupy obviously opposes. This as a business-friendly official who's urged the president to move towards the center and negotiate with congressional Republicans finds his job has been shrunk. Obama Chief of Staff Bill Daley has lost some responsibility for day-to-day management of the White House staff. The president cited Daley, a former J.P. Morgan vice chairman, for his business experience when he appointed him to the job in January. The White House insists the changes were made at Mr. Daley's request. They come as President Obama has been making more populist speeches, bashing some of the very congressional Republicans Mr. Daley tried to work with. Back to Zuccotti Park, where as many as 20 military-style tents have been purchased for $1,000 each to help shelter protesters as winter sets in for good. The tents are waterproof, double-layered, should provide more shelter than most of the camping tents already set up in the park. Occupy Wall Street also has its generators back. The protesters' legal team says the generators were returned today with no stipulation on how and where they can be used. As long as the law is obligated and the law is fulfilled here, Occupy protesters will meet later to decide how to use the gas-powered generators safely. And elsewhere around the country in the Occupy movement, Occupy Mobile might wish it had just those problems. Demonstrators there have been ordered to pack up and leave Spanish Plaza. The group says it is leaving, but not because it was ordered to go. And in Atlanta, where Occupy protesters have moved their tents to suburban Snellville to try to stop a foreclosure at a home owned by a family of 5. The group says they look to make a stand and highlight abuses by the mortgage industry, though the local sheriff's department says that foreclosure is still going forward. Best known as 2/3 of the group Crosby, Stills, and Nash, or if you prefer, half of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Their careers also encompass their work as a duo, thriving solo careers, and classic early performances with the Byrds and the Hollies. Along with songs of love lost and found, they're known for such powerful political messages as Crosby's Long Time Coming and Nash's Military Madness, which they performed at Zuccotti Park today, and which we referenced at the top of the program. Their latest release is a DVD of Crosby Nash in concert, their 2011 tour, and it is my great pleasure to welcome musicians and activists David Crosby and Graham Nash to Countdown. Gentlemen, pleasure to have you here.
How are you?
Very well, and I'm honored that you're here.
I can't tell you how honored we are. We follow you completely and completely agree with most of the things that you say.
I thank you kindly for that. Tell me about Occupy Wall Street. What did you see down there? What did you take away from it, Graham?
We saw the voice of the people. We saw them. We saw the same energy that was in Selma in Alabama. We saw the same energy in the Vietnam War, in the ladies' struggles and the African American struggles for the vote. We saw that same energy. It's still there.
Did you draw inspiration from it? Was it that sort of energizing thing that we all look for in events of this nature?
Truthfully, it made me feel fantastic, man. It's part of our job. Part of our job is just to make you feel good and make you boogie. But part of our job is to be the town crier, the troubadour, and it always has been. We learned it from people like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, and it's been something serious for us the whole time. And to go down there and start singing without any amps, without any band, with nothing, a little nervous making, and they started singing with us.
Yeah.
And they knew the songs, and they knew why we were singing them. And, I had been down there before just to kind of cruise it and talk to people, ask them what they wanted, what they needed. And they said it would lift our spirits a lot if you did come down. And truthfully, I think that's what we did. And I felt fantastic, man.
We
I
just
felt like
finished
I felt like I was doing my job.
We just finished a 7-week tour of Europe. Yeah. And we talked about Occupy Wall Street every single night. And we thought, are these people going to understand? First of all, there's a language barrier, perhaps. But every time that we mentioned them, they cheered. I swear to God, they cheered.
Well, they're having demonstrations all over Europe.
Of course.
Big ones, bigger than the park, about the park.
Yeah.
To them, it's as if they were watching America wake up. To us, it's, how a crystal starts to form in a solution when saturation point happens?
Right.
I think we're reaching the saturation
point. The edges
point.
And then in a different pattern each time, but creating something out of what was seemingly nothing there. Yeah.
I think we're reaching the saturation point. And there's a magical thing also in that they don't have a single figure that can be pointed at and said, "Oh,
blamed.
This guy's the troublemaker."
Right.
And it's that baffles them. The people we're up against, the 1% of the people who have control of most of the money in the climate.
They can't figure out who to buy.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the people who bought the government. This is like an itch they can't scratch. They can't bomb it. They can't buy it. They can't bull.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yes.
And it's really pretty exciting.
But do you have a sense also? There's been some criticism that there are no set demands, and it's still vague. Is that part and parcel with the idea that there is not one leader of the group, or not even a couple of leaders? That also this is at the hey, it's wrong stage. We'll figure out how to fix it. First, we have to get people to acknowledge it's wrong.
Exactly.
I think
that's what they're doing.
That's exactly what they're doing.
They know it's unequal. They know that it's wrong. They know the system is set against them. They know that it's a system that just favors the rich people. They know this, and they're standing up and they're laying their bodies on the line, literally, to do it. You've been down there. You know what's going on.
They've felt for a long time that their votes didn't count, that the elections get rigged or get bought. Are bought, that the guy with the biggest, TV budget gets the keys to the kingdom, and they know that's not what the Constitution meant, and it's crystallizing down there. It
was a fabulous time.
It was really,
really
exciting.
was.
All right, so you've been there before. That was your first time, Graham?
It was my first time, yes.
There are other ones, obviously, throughout the country. If you have the opportunity to go somewhere else, would you go?
Absolutely. In a second.
Yeah.
We even took food, we took hand warmers, we took lots of stuff down there too. We just didn't take ourselves.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was great is that you sensed a unity against the powers that be. Finally, the people are trying to speak out, and they have obviously the constitutional right to do so.
If the major problem of the last 20, 30 years, 35 years might have just been sort of generalized apathy, especially among the people who have the energy to protest, as the rest of us get increasingly out of that demographic group of the energized.
Right.
Do you have a sense that that it's larger than the people that you saw today?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a lot. You see, this movement does not need that park. It's
park?
way bigger than the park.
The park is just a spark. That's just the beginning.
You know, you're a poet.
That's
Did you know
nice.
that?
This is going to go on and keep getting bigger because we've reached a point where a whole lot of the country doesn't feel represented. Now, I have very liberal friends and very conservative friends. None of them feel like somebody in Washington is there for them.
Right.
Everybody I know on both sides of the fence feels like the government's been bought and they don't have a say. You know, and that's a really critical point.
All right, you've seen so many other protest movements and contributed to them over the years. And the idea that we're at about 50 days into this, does that give you enough of an idea to assess where this stands and where this might go? How this ranks is a terrible term to use in terms of other protest movements, but where it stands, say, developmentally correctly. You know what I'm saying?
I asked them today.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we got years ahead of us. They said, we're in this for the long haul. I said, how long do you think it'll be until they try to shove you out of the park? They said, soon. And they said, it doesn't matter. You know, it's not about the park. That's just where the focal point was. When we left, we were saying, stay here, stay here, stay here. But the truth is, this is way bigger than that. This is a whole country waking up and saying, "Geez, we were supposed to have a vote. We were supposed to have a say. We were supposed to have a
country."
Yeah, we were supposed to have a deal where if you worked hard, and you could, make anything you wanted out of yourself.
Yeah.
We were supposed to be able to believe any way we wanted. Now we got bread and circuses, and we got,
And we've got a system that, just wants you to lie down and be sheep. Shut up, let us rob you. You buy another pair of sneakers and a soft drink and shut up. No one's going to shut up anymore. I think this movement is going to get larger and larger and larger.
Yeah, they really are not going to go for that anymore.
Yeah. All right, so what do you think happens next? What's the next evolutionary point?
Well, what I think is that you're going to see people starting to change things, like the banks that didn't want to charge them anymore. They have awakened a monster here, and quite frankly, Keith, I'm totally amazed that the powers that be let it get this far.
Yeah, and made every bad decision they could in terms of
Absolutely.
the cops and providing all those moments of conflict and anguish and everything
They
else.
completely underestimated it. But like I said, it's not something that they've ever dealt with before. They don't have a focal point that they can vilify or try to get something on. They don't understand.
I think it's incredibly ironic that Bouazizi, right, from Tunisia, who immolated himself, was so outraged at the system, he set fire and immolated himself and sparked a fire that is worldwide. It's very ironic.
Yeah, absolutely, and the park is the spark. I think somebody better write that down if you don't. On the subject of that, can you indulge us and give us something quickly, a quick song that relates to this?
Sure,
Yeah,
we can. And this is what we did every single concert and was responded to with unbelievable fervor. And it's a song that David wrote called What Are Their Names? You want to sing it?
Want to write about there?
Sure.
No, that's probably too high. Who are the men who really run this land? And why do they run it?
with such a thoughtless hand? What are their names, and on what streets do they live? I'd like to ride over this afternoon and give them a piece of my mind about peace for mankind. Peace is not an awful lot to ask.
David Crosby and Graham Nash, as I said, an honor to have you here. And
It's our pleasure, Keith.
Really? We're fans.
Well, same here. So it's a big. We'll take a big group hug picture right after we sign
Thank
this
you.
one out.
We'll send one to Rumsfeld. Right?
He'll know who you guys are. He won't know who I am. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And if you think that was a great performance, wait till you see Herman Cain from this afternoon next. Herman Cain calls his fourth accuser a, quote, troubled woman guilty of, quote, slander who he has never met. A conservative radio host says she saw them together a month ago. One of the anonymous accusers goes on the record, and Cain is still denying everything. The Cain wreck. Does this look like a person to you? Mississippi voting today to define this as a life. What you may not know is that there are 2 bills in the House and 1 in the Senate to make that definition national. Curtains for Kasich, the latest from Ohio in the busting of the Union Busters, contentious enough that a voter was today allegedly bitten in the nose by an election official. And how one sexual harasser defends another. O'Reilly rips the media, never mentions the newest allegations. Worst persons ahead on Countdown. Herman Cain went on the attack today. He held a joint news conference with himself, calling alleged victim Sharon Bialek a liar, claiming she's guilty of, quote, slander against him, and saying in the third person again, Herman Cain has never acted inappropriately ever. This, as a second of the women, goes public with her harassment claims. In our fourth story tonight, Cain still denying all accusations, but claiming he is the innocent victim of what he called the, quote, Democratic machine. With a slander and libel attorney at his side, Cain speaking almost exclusively in the third person, claiming he had been spending the last few days racking his brain trying to remember if he had ever met his accuser, Sharon Bialek.
That I sat there and went over and over and over and over in my mind, do I know this lady? The answer kept coming up, no. I watched her again today when she appeared on Fox News with her attorney doing this interview, sitting there trying to remember, do I know her? I didn't recognize the face, I didn't recognize the name, nor the voice.
A conservative Chicago radio host saying today she saw Cain and Bialek hugging at a Tea Party event in that city just a month ago, and that Bialek, quote, grabbed his arm and whispered in his left ear. Cain now not only denying knowing Bialek, but calling her troubled and backed by a Democratic smear machine.
The fact is, these anonymous allegations are false, and now the Democrat machine in America has brought forth a troubled woman to make false accusations.
When asked if he'd take a lie detector test about that, he said yes, he would. Then immediately contradicted himself.
As distasteful as it might be, would you be willing to do a lie detector test to prove your honesty in something like this? Even
Yes.
though I'm sure, go ahead.
Yes, I absolutely would. But I'm not going to do that unless I have a good reason to do that.
Cain saying he also does not have a good reason to withdraw from the campaign, what with the American people and their grandchildren counting on him to stay in the race.
And as far as these accusations causing me to back off and maybe withdraw from this presidential primary race, ain't going to happen. Because I'm doing this for the American people and for the children and the grandchildren.
Meantime, the conservative media attacking the alleged victims. Fox's Martha McCallum attempting to link Tea Party Republican Bialek to Democratic leaders because she'd lived in the same apartment building as President Obama's advisor, David Axelrod.
Do you know David Axelrod ever had any interaction with him at all?
I saw him in the gym. Everybody nods to each other. It's a friendly building, but I never had any interaction with him.
Murdoch's New York Post publishing this gem of a headline today. Jobless and shameless gal going for gold. May have been about the author. The Rupert Murdoch media empire also took aim at another one of the accusers, Karen Kraushaar, a 55-year-old communications official at Treasury Department, registered Republican, one of the two women who settled claims in the late 90s against the NRA. She had remained anonymous until Murdoch's Daily, the iPad program, Daily, revealed her identity today. Kraushaar telling Politico that now that her identity is public, she'd like to hold a joint news conference with the other alleged victims. Meantime, Kane's biggest rival, Mitt Romney, sounding almost gleeful today about the accusations.
I just think that it's important to recognize that a number of women have come forward with concerns. This woman's charges are particularly disturbing, and they're serious.
There is evidence that Kane is losing support among Republicans now. A Reuters Ipsos poll out today finding that 40% of Republicans say they now have a less favorable view of Kane, and 39% of the Republicans say they believe Ms. Bialec's claims. Joining me now, Countdown contributor Markos Moulitsas, the publisher and editor of Daily Kos. Markos, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
I'd like to formally say here I'm endorsing Herman Cain for the Republican presidential nomination. There were so many extraordinary moments in the news conference there. Do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite?
Yeah.
Well, I love the part where he very earnestly said that he's seen as much sexual harassment against men by women as the other way around, which immediately tells you that he doesn't really understand what sexual harassment actually is. But I think my favorite moment was opening with his lawyer, because nothing says presidential material than defending yourself against these kind of charges by hiding behind your lawyer.
And not just a lawyer. That was Lynn Wood, who successfully, he's a slander and libel guy, and he successfully sued on behalf of the wrongly accused Olympic Park bomber Richard Jewell, and then worked with the Ramsey family and Anna Nicole Smith's lawyer. I mean, it's sort of like a descent from the Richard Jewell case, where he was really on the side of the Angels. But here's the word. Cain used the word slander about what Bialek said, and he used the word troubled. Why hasn't he's got Lynn Wood standing there, why didn't he come out today and say, I'm suing? Because if you're going to have a lawyer there, just as a threat, I think it gives the same sort of optics you just suggested, which is, oh boy, now we're going to have every presidential event this guy would have 3 attorneys with him to fend off whoever was claiming what about him at one point. What you have to go, if you go all the way and say, all right, here's my response to this, I'm suing her, that would have been an entirely different thing, wouldn't it?
Right. Cain has already threatened the Politico with a lawsuit.
Yep.
But I think this is his problem. The truth is actually a defense in a slander case.
Yep.
And you have a situation where, sure, it's a he said versus she said, but she has sworn testimony or sworn statements from 2 people she told about the incident right after that. Not to mention that if you're a jury and you're looking at a pattern of cases where Cain has been accused and settled on matters of sexual harassment, then it doesn't make Cain look really good. I mean, remember, you don't have people coming out and accusing Mitt Romney of sexual harassment, or even Rick Perry, right? So this is not exactly a tactic that the so-called Democrat machine will throw at whoever they want to. I mean, of course, we want we want Herman Cain to win the nomination.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine. And the more they think it's a liberal media out to get him, the happier I get, because I don't think Jesus loves us enough to give us Herman Cain to run against. That said, there's a pattern here, and I don't think any jury in their right mind would look at the situation and think that Herman Cain is on the right side of the issue.
Yeah, I know might sound like a silly question coming from me. What's my maximum donation I could make to the Cain campaign as an individual? Is it $2,300? You think I'd remember something like this?
Well, it's called Citizens United, so you can create a corporation and give them everything.
That's true. That's true. I already have a corporation. I suppose I could give him a whole lot of money. Well, I don't know. He'd probably squander it on lawyers. Seriously, where do you think this puts him? I mean, is that over? Was that the end of it? Because it seemed to me that he was about a couple of statements away from such mind-bending statements that he might have just spontaneously combusted before the end of the news conference.
Yeah, I was troubled, given that I do want him to survive and get the nomination. Obviously, it doesn't put an end to any of these questions. You have more people coming forward now. I mean, it's the media loves the story, so clearly they're not going to let it go. And what really worries me is that you're starting to see signs from social conservatives who are starting to say, maybe this guy is not the kind of guy we want to nominate. And if I'm a conservative, that's not the part that's going to bother me, because if I'm a conservative, I think, sexual harassment is no big deal. That's why I'm not a conservative. But if I'm a conservative, I'm more worried about his reaction to scandal. I mean, compare this to what happened with Barack Obama back in 2007 when he was being attacked mercilessly in the press and by his critics and by candidates because of the Reverend Wright situation, right? And the way he responded to that with his race speech was presidential material. You looked at that and you thought, okay, he can handle a crisis. Now you look at Herman Cain, you're a Republican, you say, can he handle a crisis? He's hiding behind his lawyer. I don't think that really bodes very well for him.
And with great presidential-like statements like, ain't gonna happen, which is what I want in a president. The founder and publisher, Daily Kos, Countdown contributor Markos Moulitsas, as ever, great thanks.
Thank you very much.
If Mississippi's vote today on, quote, personhood, unquote, we're not crazy enough, there's a push to make it national. The bill supported by the acceptable face of right-wing nuttery, Paul Ryan, coming up. Ohio may be a close vote. Personhood, not just for Mississippi anymore. The alarming push to make that national ahead. First on this date in 1914 was born the actor and producer Norman Lloyd, title character of Alfred Hitchcock's 1942 thriller Saboteur, Dr. Auslander in the 80s hit series St. Elsewhere, and I'm honored to say, my friend. He worked with his friend Charlie Chaplin, worked with Hitchcock for 30 years, attended the first game of the 1928 World Series, and the day I had lunch with him in L.A. in September, he was a little late because he played tennis a little longer than he had planned that morning. Happy 97th birthday to Norman Lloyd. I only hope I'm as sharp as you are now when I'm 53. Time marches on. We begin with some record breaking. This is Dan Meyer. Hello, Dan. Dan is attempting to break the record for the most swords swallowed in 30 seconds. He's in position, he's removed all of his internal organs, and he's off. Don't tell Dan, but the number of swords you actually need to swallow to impress people is just the one. One sword, people are sufficiently impressed. Dan ultimately swallows 6 swords in 30 seconds, setting a new world sword record. The previous record holder could not be reached for comment at his new job, Human Sieve. In sports, at this hockey game in Belarus, fans of the home team Dynamo Minsk began throwing cigarette lighters and other objet d'art at the bench of the visiting team Vityaz. Vityaz's coach, Andrei Nazarov, a former NHL left wing, known for his hard-hitting style of play and the ability to point to his own head, is not having it. And there they go. Grabbing a stick, begins swinging at the fans. That's 2 minutes for high sticking, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 28 minutes for high sticking. Coach Nazarov says he hopes to buy his own team one day and beat up people from the owner's box. Finally, nothing makes your wedding day more special than one of your guests serenading you at the ceremony. Our apologies in advance to Leanne Rimes.
And I don't want to breathe without you. If you ever go, I don't want ever sorry.
We had David Crosby and Graham Nash on the show, sir, and that's what you followed up with. You have to apologize in the middle of the song. You're doing it wrong, but it raises a good question. How do you live after a performance like that? Time marches on. How many presidents on Mount Rushmore? Michelle Bachmann wants 7. And no, she doesn't think the 4 up there now are natural phenomena. Coming up.
0939 or go to getthenation.com. But hurry, it's getting crazier out there every day.
Dumont brings you Drew Pearson's Washington merry-go-round. Will not be seen tonight, so we can instead bring you Countdown, the longest continuously running 8 p.m. news hour on cable, unless you consider Fox News. Our primary replays at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at 11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We call it Our Little Guest Lecture. In 1973, Roe v. Wade provided judicial protection for a woman's right to choose. Since then, the right wing has been looking for ways to subvert the ruling and impose its beliefs on every woman's pregnancy. And our third story, the Personhood Amendment in Mississippi is the latest attack on women's rights, but with 6 more states considering similar bills for a vote next year, as well as 3 national bills, it may just be the beginning. Proposition 26 in Mississippi today asking, should the term person be defined to include every human being from the moment of fertilization, cloning, or the equivalent thereof? This change in definition would make abortion completely illegal, outlaw several forms of birth control, and make in vitro fertilization infeasible. It's not the first time conservatives have attempted to pass a personhood bill. Similar bills failed in Colorado in 2008 and 2010. But with the expected success in Mississippi today, the right wing has been emboldened in its quest to limit women's rights. Groups in California, Florida, Ohio, Oregon, Montana, and Nevada have all begun gathering signatures to get similar propositions on the ballot in 2012. But the overall goal is to have a national amendment passed, or a bill of some sort. Right now, 3 separate bills have been written and endorsed by House and Senate GOP members. H.R. 212, also called the Sanctity of Human Life Act, boasts 63 House Republican co-sponsors, including economic wonder boy Paul Ryan. H.R. 374, the Life at Conception Act, has 91 co-sponsors, including presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann. The Senate version of the Life at Conception Act, which is S91, has 12 so-called family conscience co-sponsors, including David Vitter. On that note, let's bring in Huffington Post reporter Laura Bassett, who has been focusing on this story for quite a while. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Mississippi first. Do we know what's expected from the vote?
It's been extremely close. The latest polling that I saw, it was 45 to 44, with 45% of the voters saying that they were going to vote for it. It's still too close to call at this point.
All right, the national bills, is there any realistic chance of any of them getting anywhere? And if not, what are they out there for?
The Senate has a pro-choice majority. I don't think there's any chance right now of a personhood bill passing in the House or the Senate. But I think that the movement has gained a little bit of momentum now that people see that something like this could actually pass in a state like Mississippi. And you know, pro-lifers are sort of getting on the train and trying to tout their pro-life credentials.
In Mississippi, to begin with, was there a significant pushback against that bill? And is there a national structure in place, or was this just not taken seriously until the momentum started building in Mississippi?
I think you're right. I think it wasn't taken very seriously until recently, and the pushback has been surprisingly weak in Mississippi, even among Democrats and pro-choice lawmakers. I think they're afraid of coming out and saying that they oppose this amendment because it's being painted as a simple pro-choice versus pro-life issue, and the constituents in Mississippi are majority pro-life, and lawmakers know that it would be political suicide to come out and say that they oppose it. But I think many of them do, and many of them are expressing concerns, including the extremely pro-life and conservative Governor Haley Barbour, who came out last week and said, you know, this goes a little bit too far, and then turned around the next day and voted for it after some pushback from his pro-life constituents. So I think that people are kind of staying mum in Mississippi, and it's surprising.
Is there an expectation that if it passes in Mississippi and it is enacted and the governor for some reason doesn't veto it, as we would assume he would not, that there would be test case in fairly short order? Is that ultimately the goal, to get the Roe v. Wade addressed without readdressing that actual case and going by the side door of the Supreme Court?
I think that is the goal, and I spoke with Les Riley, who is the founder of the personhood movement, and he, you know, came out and said, Roe v. Wade is what we're aiming for. We want to reverse it. They see it as a blemish in the nation's history. They want to get that reversed, and they want to use that as a means to ban abortion across the nation.
Is there a point approaching in the Republican Party, in the House in particular, where they might merge those bills, and if not get it passed, actually make this something on which they would fight part of the national election next year?
I think there's a very strong chance of these bills passing in the House. They have many, many supporters. One of them has 64 co-sponsors, I believe, in the House. And I think while there's a strong chance of it passing the House, I mean, a ton of anti-abortion legislation has passed the House this year and last year. It's going to be blocked in the Senate. So I don't think there's a strong chance of it being enacted. But there's definitely a pro-life majority in the House, and they have power, and they're gaining power.
And would they be able to dictate terms to the Republican presidential nominee, whoever the survivor of that contest might be?
I think you know, most of the Republican candidates right now are very strongly pro-life, and all of them except John Huntsman have come out in support of personhood or something like it. I think so. It's likely that personhood could actually make leeway if a Republican actually wins the seat.
Just remarkable. Laura Bassett of Huffington Post, who's been following personhood for quite some time. Thank you for your insight and your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Another state voting today, Ohio, on the union-busting law. Good news, Whereas the vote might be closer than anticipated, only one voter thus far has been bitten by an Ohio state election official. Stand by. Not nail-biting time, but nose-biting time in Ohio as the state votes on the governor's union-busting bill. Literally, nose-biting reported at the polls. First, the worst. Why this man has to be fired immediately. Next on Countdown. Ohio and issue 2 live to Columbus in a moment. First, because while these people may be zombies and not actually alive, we must nevertheless truck with them here. Here are Countdown's top 3 nominees for today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. She has some suggestions about Mount Rushmore. She thinks there should be 7 presidents carved up there, not just the current 4. One of them you can guess, Reagan. They all think Reagan is Obi-Wan Kenobi. In fact, he's dead and he was a lousy president. The other 2 you'd never guess in a million years. Not George Bush, neither of them. Not Eisenhower, not even Nixon. Calvin Coolidge and James Garfield. Calvin Coolidge, because Bachmann claims he got the country's budget back on track. She's neglecting, of course, the fact that 7 months after he did that and Coolidge left office in 1929, the American economy crashed. But James Garfield, because Bachmann claims Garfield was the only congressman ever elected president, she intends to be the second congressperson. He was also assassinated 7 months into his term, didn't really do anything. I think I know what the problem is here. Bachmann thinks President Garfield and Garfield the cat are the same thing. The runner-up, Billo the Clown of the political whorehouse that is Fox News. Some conservative water carriers attacked Herman Cain's latest accuser, Sharon Bialek. She is still the latest, isn't she? Is? It's 47. Okay, I'll check. They attacked her by sliming her. Murdoch's New York Post character assassin, Andrea Pizer, made up an anonymous source who then supposedly said Bialek is a complete gold digger. Then she criticized Bialek's makeup, which is really dangerous territory for Ms. Pizer to enter. But O'Reilly took a different tack. He ignored her. 5-minute segment last night on Cain, never mentioned the Bialek accusations. On the record, in public, specific details, never even alluded to it. What did he allude to? His own ratings! And a survey by the comic relief of media analysis groups Newsbusters. In 6 days, CNN ran more stories about Herman Cain than they did in the entire presidential campaign with Wright, Rezko, and Ayers. Possibly because Barack Obama was never accused of sexually assaulting any of them. I look at CNN and MSNBC's ratings every night. I compete against them, all right? For 10 years, a decade, they haven't moved an inch. In fact, they're worse now than they were 10 years ago, all right? Both of them. So I'm saying to myself, you know what? We, Goldberg and O'Reilly, we cover this media stuff every week. We pointed out every week that it's not fair. The reportage is not honest, okay? The folks get it. There's no other reason on earth for the low ratings that our competing cable news networks get other than a lack of credibility. 36 years in television and still you don't get it. You're not selling credibility. You're selling incredibility. You're telling things that aren't true to an audience that desperately needs to believe things that aren't true. Although, got to admit, you're talking about sexual harassment of employees, Bill. I'm giving you credit. That is a subject on which you're an expert, Andrea Mackers. But our winner, Penn State's venerable football coach, Joe Paterno. There has been extraordinary hand-wringing over his fate in the wake of the appalling child rape scandal inside the football program he has run since 1966. The New York Times reported today that the university is working on an exit strategy for Paterno that could play out over the next few days or weeks. It's not good enough. One of Paterno's graduate assistants witnessed one of Paterno's most trusted colleagues raping a 10-year-old boy in the shower of the Penn State football team headquarters. The assistant went to Paterno, and Paterno went to the university athletic director. That was 9 years ago. No follow-up. Paterno may have misunderstood the severity of the crime, may have thought it was, quote, only, unquote, molestation. But if somebody who worked for you told you that he'd witnessed somebody else who worked for you molesting a boy in your building, would you go to somebody else who was nominally your boss but who in fact also worked for you, or would you drag the witness to the police? Or at least, would you check back in the next few days or months or years to find out what the hell had happened? Joe Paterno needs to be fired as the football coach at Penn State. The athletic director, the university officials, including the president, same for them. But he made himself the only face of that program. And he failed all of the kids, the kids and the player kids he purported to be protecting. No exit strategy, no weeks, no months. Don't treat Paterno the way Paterno treated the witness account of child rape. Fire him tomorrow morning. Joe Paterno, today's worst person in the world. First results from Ohio and the voting there on issue 2, which would be the elimination of the Senate Bill 5, which essentially busts unions in the public theater in Ohio. No would result in the the original bill being removed from the books, and yes would allow Governor Kasich and the Koch brothers to get their way. Only 2.5%, or 7% now reporting, 63-37 no in favor. That's from the Secretary of State's website. And again, no is the guy you are probably rooting for. The sure sign that Ohio may be an important barometer in the nation's electoral process, $37.5 million raised inside and outside the state for that battle over that issue 2 on today's ballot. And our number 1 story, to overwhelm you with numbers on the countdown, Ohioans headed to the polls today to reject what was the centerpiece of Governor John Kasich's legislative agenda. But whatever happens, it's not a sure sign of a Democratic victory next year. In March, Kasich signed that law curtailing union rights to collective bargaining, impacting the more than 350,000 teachers, firefighters, police officers, and other public employees in Ohio. Labor groups collected more than 1 million signatures to force the issue onto the ballot today. They had 17,000 volunteers working on the Get Out the Vote effort. It turns out most of the state's voters don't just dislike Kasich's law, they dislike Kasich as well. Only 36% of Ohioans polled by Quinnipiac University approve of the way the governor's doing his job. The Democratic public policy polling firm ranks the former investment banker and Fox fill-in host as the nation's second least popular sitting governor. But when it comes to the presidential election, Ohio voters are not giving a clear thumbs up either. Mr. Obama narrowly won that state's 20 electoral votes in 2008. Now more voters there say the president does not deserve a second term, 49-44% according to the same poll, Quinnipiac. Still, the same poll also found the president does have the lead against each of his likely Republican rivals in 2012. He beats Romney by 4, Kane by 8, Perry by 11. Back to today's vote. So far, it is shaping up to be a hard-bitten election day for at least the one Ohioan, a voter near Cleveland, telling an ABC news station he was bitten in the nose by a county election day rover, a traveling election troubleshooter, when he stepped in to help a woman engaged in an argument over the placement of signs outside a polling location. The rover supposedly ran away from the poll, and an investigation is underway. Just another day in the colorful history of voting in Ohio. Joining me now, Mother Jones reporter Andy Kroll, who's been watching it all from the ground in Ohio since Thursday. Thanks for being with us, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
All right, any indication of where this is going from the early whopping lead by no over yes?
Polls going into Tuesday's election suggested a 20-point victory for unions, for those trying to repeal SB 5, Governor Kasich's bill. And the votes that we've seen tallied so far suggest that it's going to be a pretty decisive victory for unions. Whether that 20-digit, 25-point lead holds or not, it looks like unions are going to get that hard-earned victory tonight.
The broader implications for the country would be what? Is there any way of saying that other than the fact that Wisconsin, it seemed like the left and the Democrats were caught napping, as they say, and then in Ohio, quite the contrary. The left seemed to be fully prepared for this and got the results that they would have hoped for?
Yeah, Ohio is organized labor, and the Democrats' last big chance in 2011 to clinch a victory. They didn't overturn Governor Walker's anti-union bill in Wisconsin. They didn't get all the wins they wanted in the Senate recall elections there, really the first blowback to Walker's bill. But here we are in Ohio. They're on the cusp of a really big victory, and it's their last big fight of the year. So not only does it end the year on a good note, but it also sets the stage and gives some momentum to folks back in Wisconsin who are trying to now repeal Governor Walker himself. So there's a lot of momentum leaving 2011 here.
Implications for organized labor nationally, are there any that you can discern?
Well, their backs are against the wall. They've had some bad losses this year. Their numbers are dwindling, but I think Ohio is a really good testament to when their rights are on the line, when the matter gets really, really grave. They can mobilize their folks. They can get out 17,000 volunteers. They can really sort of flex that grassroots muscle, when their livelihood is at stake. And so it'll be an uplifting night for them if this win comes out as it looks it's going to be.
What does it say in terms not necessarily of outcome for the 2012 presidential election, but in terms of the Get Out the Vote and the grassroots movement and the organization of the left in Ohio for next year because, as everybody knows, perhaps they can repeat this in their sleep, Ohio has voted the winner of the last 12 presidential elections.
Yeah, the big takeaway is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm has been, off the charts across the board, all 88 counties here in in Ohio. Enthusiasm is something that you can't measure in polls as well. It's not data. It's not something that you can calculate, but it matters. It's absolutely crucial. Enthusiasm is what won President Obama the White House in 2008. And so you're going to have both the organizational structures built up for this fight, issue 2, and you're going to have the enthusiasm, folks just sort of, on a high after this win and sort of rebuking a Republican governor. And that's going to carry into 2012. Obviously, issues like the economy, unemployment's 9.1% here. It's still quite bad. That's going to hang over the president. But, they're going to love having people excited after a win here, and they're going to hopefully carry that excitement into next fall.
And as you see now with the official count at 10%, 63-37 no in the vote on issue 2 to repeal SB 5. Andy Kroll of Mother Jones at Columbus, Ohio for us. Great thanks for some of your time tonight, Andy.
My pleasure.
All right, that's countdown for this, the 308th day since the Republicans took control of the House, 308 days without them having passed one jobs bill of any kind, the first ever edition of Countdown with a live musical performance in it. I'm Keith Olbermann. Congratulations on surviving another day of this crap. Good night and good luck.